Okay, in this lesson we're going to talk about Reconstruction. So the Civil War is now over and now we need to focus on rebuilding the South, and that's what Reconstruction means. So the objectives are explore how Congress and the President clashed over Reconstruction, describe the impact of Reconstruction on the South, and explain how Reconstruction came to an end. Okay, so key questions we have to ask ourselves. How do we bring the South back into the Union? I mean, they were our brothers, they were our family, and they broke apart, and you just can't let them back in very easily because, well, 620,000 people are killed. How do we rebuild the South after destruction during the war? The economy is in shambles. The tobacco production, cotton production, rice production are destroyed. Its economy is destroyed. What branch of government should control this process? That was a tough one. The president had ideas, the vice president had ideas, Congress had ideas of all how we should bring back, rebuild the South. And how do we integrate and protect the newly emancipated black freedmen? And so you need to take into effect that, well, there's 3 million freedmen now in the South, and how are they going to get jobs? What type of jobs are they going to hold? What type of education are they going to get? Because they literally have nothing, and we need to help them out. Politics of Reconstruction. So, Lincoln's obviously not going to be around for Reconstruction. He is going to be assassinated. When you look at the South, homes are burned, plantations are burned, crops are burned, businesses are closed. Wiped out $4 billion of human flesh, which is slavery. Cotton, sugar, tobacco, rice took years to produce like they did in the 1860s. And now we need to protect those African Americans that now have new freedom. The 13th Amendment would be passed right away. And the 13th Amendment kind of elaborates on the Emancipation Proclamation is it frees slaves everywhere. When you make an amendment to a constitution, it applies to all the states. So the 13th Amendment outlawed slavery. You will need to know the Constitution amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. African Americans were now free from slavery, but they didn't have citizenship, they could not vote, and they didn't have access to education. So we need to fix those things. So first, the Freedmen's Bureau, which Congress and the President passed, provides food, shelter, medical aid for the poor. Okay, so a bunch of Northerners go down, they set up these freedmen bureaus, and they provide food and shelter for the new freed blacks and medical aid and start building churches and schools. Unfortunately, Lincoln is not going to see Reconstruction occurring because on April 14, 1865, he was shot in the head while attending a play at Ford's Theater. He was killed by John Wilkes Booth, a Southern sympathizer, who at first was planning on just to kidnap Lincoln and to prolong the war, but he later decided to assassinate him. Booth escapes the assassination, jumps off the balcony, hobbles off, jumps on a horse, and escapes for about 12 days until they finally catch up to him, surround him in a barn, and he is later killed there. Doctors tried desperately to revive, to help Lincoln, but it was pretty futile. There's kind of the path that John Wilkes Booth took. There were other people, though, that were part of this plot to kill the president. Not only to kill the president, but to kill Ulysses S. Grant, to kill Andrew Johnson, and to kill the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. And many other people were a part of this. The only one that went through with it, though, was John Wilkes Booth and killing the president. So now we have the Vice President, Andrew Johnson. He's now president. Now here's the funny thing. In 1864, there was an election. We didn't talk about it, but in 1860, Abraham Lincoln wins the election, then every 4 years we have another one. And even though there was a war going on in 1864, we had an election. And it was Abraham Lincoln, the Republican, versus George McClellan, his general, who is now a Democrat. And of course, Abraham Lincoln won, and it was close, but he won mainly because we started winning some victories in the Civil War. Sherman had just taken Atlanta to Savannah, and so Johnson won. But he put a new vice president on his ticket, Andrew Johnson, who was a Democrat, who was from the South. And Lincoln did that on a purpose to try and tell the South, like, listen, we're trying to work together. Little did he know that Lincoln would be killed, and Andrew Johnson, this Democrat from the South, will now become president. And guess what? He's sympathetic to the South, and he's very racist towards blacks. Since he was so easy on the South, now he said only 10% needed to swear loyalty. And he pardoned many aristocrats, which are wealthy people from the South, and he believed in state rights over federal laws, meaning states had more power than the federal government. And states started passing what were called black codes. You'll need to remember this, black codes, which restrict the rights of newly freed blacks. It prohibits them from renting land, borrowing money to buy land. It prevents them from owning guns, holding public meetings. Any type of interracial marriages, prohibits blacks from testifying against whites in courts. So these are laws that we put into place for the next 100 years, segregating blacks in all types of society. So Republicans in Congress are pretty upset with the new president, Andrew Johnson. They're like, who won this war? When the new southern states started to come back into the Union and they started nominating senators and representatives, Congress refused to seat them because they were the old aristocrat, white, racist leaders, and they were not willing to seat to them. Johnson starts vetoing bills that Congress is passing. Congress is passing bills to protect the new freed slaves and to increase the Freedmen's Bureau and to give a civil rights bill that gives citizenship to blacks in the South, and Johnson vetoed them. But you can override a veto in Congress by a 2/3 vote, and for the first time in history, that's what Congress did. Johnson vetoed bills, but it didn't matter because Republicans controlled the majority in both houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate, and they can override his vetoes with a 2/3 vote. So at this point, President Johnson has lost really any type of power by 1866. As a result, Congress then passes the 14th Amendment, which is the most important amendment probably in our Constitution. It guarantees citizenship to all people born or naturalized within the United States, except for Indians. It said that state governments cannot deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. So this is really taking the rights out of states' rights and putting it into federal hands. And so now with the 14th Amendment, it grants citizenship to all those new freed African Americans and all the rights of citizenship, and the Bill of Rights 1 through 10, all that, the Constitution is now guaranteed to them. So this is why this is important. So the 13th Amendment ended slavery. The 14th Amendment granted them citizenship. The South would be put into 5 military districts, as you can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, under an army and a general, a Union general. And they would stay there until the states granted African Americans, made sure that everything was okay. They were getting their citizenship. The slaves were free. They helped them with, signing contracts and things like this, making sure that they were treated correctly. Congress also tried to get rid of Johnson by impeaching him. In fact, they did impeach him. There was a trial in the Senate, but he was acquitted by 1 vote. 35-19. So he gets to remain president, but they did try to get rid of him for breaking some laws. Didn't matter though, because it was about 6 months until a new election. And in 1868, you had a new election, and you had Ulysses S. Grant, Republican versus Democrat Horatio Seymour. And of course, U.S. Grant, he's a war hero. People knew him. And the reason why he probably won was because African Americans were allowed to vote in the South, and they came out in big numbers to vote, and that's a good reason why probably Grant won. President Grant's administration was marked by corruption, though. He was a good general, but he knew nothing about being a president, and he used the spoils system, meaning that he put a lot of his friends in power into positions and cabinet members that really didn't know what to do, and in fact they abused it. They sold off land, they took bribes from businesses and railroad companies, and it didn't look very good for Grant and his presidency. The 15th Amendment did come around, stated that no one could be kept from voting because of race, color, or previous servitude. That was passed in 1870. So the 15th Amendment gives the right to vote for all people. And it can't be based off their race, color, or previous servitude. This is just for males, though. Ladies are not going to get the right to vote until the 19th Amendment. So the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments you will need to remember. Again, the 15th Amendment grants the right for people to, the right to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous conditions, servitude. But the South is going to find ways around that, as you can see in this picture here. You have, looks like these Southern white men intimidating this black man from voting. Here's the voting box over here. You have a couple people in the background dragging a black man away. And so you have these intimidation factors, and you have the Ku Klux Klan spring up after the Civil War, which are a bunch of ex-Confederate leaders who their main job is to scare black people from voting. Because what happened after the Civil War was that many blacks were elected to state and national governments. In South Carolina, the first state that broke away, for a while had a majority of African American members in the House of Legislature. So we all know the economy was poor, and a lot of freedmen did what was called sharecropping. What had happened was the landlord would give each worker land and tools, and in return, the African American would give part of his crop, usually half. Sometimes we call it tenant farming, but it was called sharecropping, and it was pretty poor because it was just a cycle of debt. Because usually as a landlord you gave them the poorest land and it didn't do well, and you went to the store and you bought your seeds and tools and they were overpriced, and you usually fell into debt. So sharecropping, you fell into debt with the landlord a lot of times. The Klan comes up, Ku Klux Klan, ex-Confederate General Nathaniel Bedford Forrest runs that. Congress did try to pass acts to try and stop the Klan from its violence, but it was pretty much overlooked. President Grant wins again in 1872, but again the South is starting to focus on other matters. The economy takes a downturn, and people are wondering how much time they should spend on Reconstruction. With the election of 1876, Reconstruction comes to an end. Republicans have Rutherford B. Hayes, Democrats nominate Samuel J. Tilden. And even though Tilden won the popular vote, more people voted for the Democrat, the electoral vote was in dispute in a couple of the southern states, so they had to come up with a compromise, which was the Compromise of 1877. And they decided to let Rutherford B. Hayes, a Republican, become president if he swore to take the army out of the South, to get rid of the military districts, and so they would all come home and support a southern transcontinental railroad, which he did. So let's talk about the successes and failures of Reconstruction. The Union is restored. Okay, the country is brought back together. That's the important thing. The 14th and 15th Amendment guarantee black rights. 14th, citizenship. 15, voting. The Freedmen's Bureau helped others, reunited families, helped them with jobs and schooling and signing contracts. Failures, though, many white Southerners returned to power in the South. It was slow to industrialize. State governments and white Southerners terrorized African Americans. Many blacks and white Southerners remained in serious poverty. And racist attitudes towards blacks continued in both the South and the North. So overall, yes, we did reunite the country again, but the South became pretty bad after the military districts were were gone and the soldiers came home.